All Indiana Politics is your premier source for Indiana politics, focusing on issues that matter to you.
I still want us to be the best in the Midwest.
We can't afford another lockdown.
Give the citizens of this country the relief they need.
Education in the state of Indiana remains priority number one.
In-depth, nonpartisan coverage.
We don't know exactly where the economy will be in January.
People are worried with good reason.
Exclusive interviews with Indiana's political leaders.
We have the resources here in the state of Indiana to care for those who are in need.
Expert analysis on critical legislation.
We need to reform those laws.
This recovery is going to take some time.
We've got to anticipate that there'll be a budget shortfall.
From Wish TV, this is All Indiana Politics Podcast on the All Indiana Podcast Network.
Good morning and welcome to All Indiana Politics. I'm Garrett Bergquist in for Phil Sanchez. It took nearly a week for Indiana utility companies to finish turning the power back on after a derecho swept through the state. Congressman Larry Bucshon serves on the House Energy Subcommittee. I asked him what those storms mean for our electrical grid. Let's welcome in Congressman Larry Bucshon. Congressman, welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
I want to begin with the tens of thousands of power outages Indiana had from a derecho that swept through at the end of June. It took AES Indiana 4 days to restore power to all of its customers here in Indianapolis. You serve on the House Energy Subcommittee. Is there room here for federal funding to help bury vulnerable power lines to prevent something like this in the future?
Well, I think ultimately, yes. And, we're working through that process nationwide. I think, storms are honestly a persistent challenge. I do think neighborhoods, that are new, that are burying the lines versus having them in the air is a process that's occurring. But, to a certain extent, you're going to always have some risks as it relates to trees that, that fall down and hit power lines. But the bigger issue nationwide is actually the cybersecurity risk and also what I'll call the domestic terrorism risk of physical damage to substations and things like that shut off power. And we saw that in North Carolina, where it was a very concerted attack on a power station that was planned, and it shut off power for a long period of time. So, it's pretty hard to avoid the storms. But everywhere that we can clear away the trees and other things like that can cause trouble, and also where we can bury power lines will be important.
Do the numbers that we saw that week worry you about the condition of our electrical grid?
No, I mean, not really. I think in the bigger picture, like I mentioned, I think the risks more to the power grid are more cyber risks, and also physical damage from people who are putting in a concerted effort to damage the grid. It's not only the electrical power grid. You saw the pipeline shut down on the East Coast. That was a cyber attack that limited the gasoline supply to the East Coast there for a while until the pipeline was turned back on. So I think at the federal level, we're looking at bigger picture. What are the cyber risks to the grid? What are the structural risks to the grid as far as how do we protect our transformers and those type of things from physical damage? And then, as things happen as it relates to damage from storms, looking realistically about if we can replace some of these power lines locally with ones that are buried that aren't as big a risk of being damaged during a storm.
You voted against the infrastructure bill. That included $5 billion for projects to harden the electrical grid. Did your vote put us at risk of something like that?
No, I don't think so. I mean, the fact of the matter is 80% of the infrastructure bill I supported. There were a number of things that I think were overreach as far as federal spending, most of it related to, honestly, energy projects that were in the green energy space favored by the administration, that I feel are way out ahead of where we should be on some of those projects as far as federal spending. So, no, I don't think so. I think 80% of what was in that bill as it relates to reauthorizing the highway program, doing things to improve our energy grid, I support all those things. But the other stuff was put in the bill purposefully to force Republicans to vote against it for political reasons, and I understand that. But the reality is everybody in Washington on both sides of the aisle know what the risks are, particularly, again, cyber, domestic terrorism.
The nation logged more than 20 mass shootings over the Independence Day weekend. Why does Congress continue to do nothing to curb this?
Well, I would argue there's not much Congress can do about it. I mean, the reality is we have a violent society right now, and I think, there's a lot of people out there that feel left behind by our economy in this country. You see serious problems in our major cities that are not being addressed, related to the fact that we have had longstanding poverty issues, gang issues, drug issues, and honestly, the lack of educational opportunities for a large population of our citizens, particularly in urban areas and also somewhat in rural areas. So the problem, it can't be solved on the back end. The problem needs to be solved on the front end. Why do people feel like they have to resort to violence when they are having trouble, and why can't we solve some of the issues like poverty, educational opportunities that are lacking in many of these areas of our country?
You filed a bill to expand the use of employment-based immigration visas. Tell me about that.
Yes, and that we have a serious problem here in our legal immigration system. We're a country of immigrants, including my own, Hungary and England and Ireland back in the early 1900s. And here's the issue. We cannot address our legal system because we're all tied up on the border, and both sides of the aisle have gone to our corners. So what I'm trying to do with this is, these are people who are already in the United States. They're working. They have work-related visas, and they can't get green cards. And there's about 140,000 of those allocated every year, and many of them go unused. And why is that? Well, because there's country caps on how many people can come from certain countries. I'm not saying we change the caps. All I'm saying is, don't let these visas expire. If there are available visas for people who are already here, they're working, many of them doctors, lawyers, nurses, other professionals. Why don't we allocate those to people who are on the country cap list instead of just letting them expire?
Is there any future for this bill in Congress?
I think there is, actually. It's bipartisan. Raja Krishnamurthy from the Chicagoland area and I are working on this together. We have some other bipartisan support. I've talked to members of the Judiciary Committee, which has jurisdiction on our side of the aisle, and I've talked to leadership about this. It's just common sense. We do have people on both sides of the aisle that aren't interested, Republicans and Democrats, for different reasons. But this is just common sense. This is something we should be doing. We shouldn't be allowing this to happen. The waiting list is 20 or 30 years right now for people who are on the country cap list, particularly from India.
Before I let you go, I want to briefly turn to an international matter. Should NATO offer membership to Ukraine at next week's summit in Vilnius, Lithuania?
I don't think we should at this point. I mean, I think, the Ukraine is not ready to be a NATO member prior to the war, right? To be a NATO member, you have to have structural stability in your government. And everybody, I think, around the world knows that in the Ukraine, there has been a level of corruption over the years. They are solving that problem. I think the current president of the country has made headway. But now that they're in the throes of a war and we haven't been able to fully assess their membership, I don't think that right now we should be offering the Ukraine NATO membership. We need to get past the war. We need to make sure that they meet the criteria that every other country that's in NATO meets. And the thing we need to do in the interim, we need to continue to support the Ukraine's efforts in getting the Russians out of their country.
Coming up, Indiana's best political team talks the electrical grid, road funding for cities, and much more. Welcome back to All Indiana Politics as we welcome in two members of Indiana's best political team, Democrat Kip Two and Republican Whitley Yates. Let's begin with that interview which we just heard from Congressman Larry Bucshon. He and I talked about hardening the grid after those storms. Whitley, how much of that task should be up to the state as opposed to the federal government, and for that matter, the utility companies?
I always think that the state should do what is best for them, I think with the help of the federal government, but I do think that each state is different. We've seen some of these electrical storms and terrible things happen specifically in Texas, which has a completely different system than we do here in Indiana. And so I think that states should look at what's best for their citizens in their state and govern accordingly.
Kip, I noted Bouchon voted against President Joe Biden's infrastructure bill. He said he supported the utility portions, but he voted against it due to other provisions in it. Should Congress going forward take a narrower approach to hardening the grid to ensure more projects related to that can pass?
I listened, and I was particularly struck by the fact that he said that he supported 80% of the bill, but he didn't support 20% of the bill. I would say if you can get 80% of what you want in a bill, you should vote for it. If there's 20% you don't like, then you complain about that 20%, but you still support it. It's part of what the huge problem in Congress is if I don't get 100%, I'm not going to sit down and talk to you. I'm not going to compromise. That to me, that was a really bad answer on his part. That he said 8%. He was for 80% of the bill. And I might add, I mean, Whitley, brought up what I thought was a fairly good point. But there was a lot of money in the infrastructure bill for hardening our utility assets. The issue, of course, is it always comes out of somebody's pocket, right? And if you're at the feds, then it's going to come out of our federal taxes. If you're at the state, it's going to come out of our state taxes. And if it's a utility, then it comes out of utility bills. So the consumer is going to get hit no matter where it is. And we want somebody to be smart about how they're making these investments.
Speaking of investments, Indianapolis Mayor Joe Hogsett wants state lawmakers to change how they calculate how much money cities get for the streets. He wants them to base it on traffic volume rather than center lane miles. He said this would lead to more funding for the entire Indy metro area. Kip, what are the chances the General Assembly goes for this?
Well, I actually think the chances are pretty good. I think Mayor Hogsett has been working with suburban leaders as well, and I think they're somewhat united with respect to this issue. It's been a long time that both Marion County and Hamilton County have been net donors to the rest of the state, and it's high time that we say, we ought to be looking at what we call populated areas versus non-populated areas when we do the funding formula when it comes to roads, because populated areas are getting used a lot more. Populated areas are getting taxed a lot more. They ought to be getting their fair share of the revenue to help fix their roads. It makes a lot more sense than what we do now, which is rural areas get a disproportionate amount of funding for roads that don't get used nearly as much.
Whitley, will Republican lawmakers go for an idea coming from a Democratic mayor? And is there a risk that this is going to set up a fight between urban and rural areas?
Can we be honest? Hogsett has had 7 years to make these types of policy recommendations, and he hasn't done anything. And now that he's running for re-election, all of a sudden he has policy recommendations for
Whitley, we appear to have lost you. Can you go ahead and start over? We lost you for a minute.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you now. Go ahead and start over. We lost you there for a minute.
Yeah. So Mayor Hogsett has had 7 years to make policy proposals that impacted infrastructure while he was mayor. And now in an election year that he's running for re-election, all of a sudden he has policy proposals. Coincidentally, policy proposals for infrastructure after the long session closed, after we had a budget year. It's not about whether or not the General Assembly is going to be able to tackle this or to make these types of changes. It's the fact that he waited too late, and now this probably won't even get into effect until maybe the next 2 years when there's the next budget session. Where was
I just don't think that's fair at all. If Whitley had been paying attention during this session, she'd have known that the mayor was working with the state legislature and actually made some significant changes, and he is now working with suburban mayors.
Listen, I didn't cut you off, so I don't expect to be cut off. He submitted his legislative agenda after the session had already closed, and there was already a bill by both Democrat and Republicans specifically talking about
I do want to go ahead and move on here. State Representative Jim Lucas posted on Facebook about his recent drunk driving arrest. He pleaded guilty to a misdemeanor charge in June and avoided jail time. Whitley, did the criminal justice system let Lucas off easy, and should he continue to serve in the legislature?
I'm going to be honest. I don't really like speaking about other people's personal accountability for his actions. That's what we ask of our public leaders and our public servants. No one is perfect and everyone makes mistakes. I mean, when I look at some of the politicians on the other side that have done similar things 3 and 4 times, in particular, specifically in Marion County, with our last constable, they were given chance after chance after chance, and it never made the news, and we never discussed it or talked about it. I don't think it's a slap on the wrist. I think it's an accountable decision, and I do not think that he should be removed from the General Assembly.
Kip, Lucas has no prior criminal record. Similar question to you, and is this enough punishment for him?
You know, I don't want to step in the shoes of the judgment that was made by the prosecutor and the court here.
Kip, we're going to have to wrap up here because we're getting short on time. Stand by, though. We'll be back after this. Welcome back to All Indiana Politics. Still with us are Republican Whitley Yates and Democrat Kip Tu. New numbers from the Department of Health show abortions in Indiana dropped markedly in the first 3 months of 2023. Illinois, meanwhile, had a slight increase. Whitley, if those people simply went elsewhere for abortions, did the abortion ban do what its sponsors intended?
I don't think that you can look at policy through such a lens. I think if you see we saw a decrease, and that is exactly what they were intended with that act. If they went other places, and that is well within their rights, as Indiana has been very clear about their specific stance on this issue.
Kip, how concerned are you those numbers simply went underground or went to other states?
Well, I think it's probably pretty obvious that that's what's happened. And I think it's taking away women's rights, taking away their bodily autonomy, I hope will cost Republicans in the upcoming election cycle, because we had it for 50 years in this country that women had bodily autonomy. They no longer do. They're second-class citizens of the state of Indiana, and I think it's an abomination.
Let's turn to some national issues. Oh, sorry, Whitley, I'll let you jump in there.
I'm just saying, I'm not a second-class citizen, but I see what he's attempting to do, the fear-mongering.
All right, so let's go ahead and turn to some national issues. A federal judge blocked the Biden administration's efforts to work with social media companies to combat the spread of disinformation. Kip, did Biden's proposal stray too far into censorship territory?
I don't think so. I don't think so at all. I think it was a reasonable attempt to discuss with social media conglomerates the problem that we have in the country of an incredible amount of misinformation out there. There was no heavy hand of government. It was a discussion, and I think it was perfectly appropriate. We've had, a couple of years now of a former president lying 24/7 about him losing the election. And that is a significant problem because 40% of the country still believes the lie. And we have to get to a point in this country where there are facts and people all understand the facts and that we can all agree to facts. But when you have the leader of the Republican Party lying constantly about what was a fact, we got a big problem.
Whitley, I'll let you respond to that, but we've also seen how easily social media can be used to spread disinformation, especially with this year's advances in artificial intelligence. Should there be some set standard to help stop the spread of disinformation?
I think that listen, I'm gonna be honest. I'm a proponent of freedom of speech. You can be wrong and strong and loud and proud either way. I think Biden and his entire administration is all about control. So I'm glad that they did not get the opportunity to control this, because the truth is they are consistently controlling media. And we saw that with the Twitter files that were released. They've consistently used social media to push specific narratives that they wanted the American. That you want us to listen to or focus on what is important to you and disregard things like his son's laptop, driving 172 miles and potentially smoking crack. I don't know. But I'm glad that we are not in a position where we have the government telling us what is the truth, and we can decipher that for ourselves.
Got about a minute and a half here, so just briefly, the United States and its NATO allies will convene in Vilnius, Lithuania this coming week. Ukraine's potential membership is almost sure to come up. Kip, the Biden administration has slow-walked heavy equipment for Ukraine. How likely is it NATO actually extends a membership offer? Give me about 30 seconds.
Boy, I'm really not an expert with respect to this, but I strongly support Ukraine's war against Russia. I think we ought to do everything we possibly can do, short of sending our own kids over there to support what Ukraine needs. And I hope that NATO at least does that. I don't know whether it's appropriate at this moment for them to be members of NATO, but we ought to show force to Russia that we're not going to let Russia walk over their neighbors.
30 seconds here. Whitley, just briefly, depending on whether or not a membership offer comes up, how do you see that affecting the Republican primary field?
I don't see it affecting the Republican primary at all. I don't believe that. Well, I don't see that offer being substantiated now.
All right. Thank you both. We will be right back.
Take All Indiana Politics on the go with you. Download our podcast now. Part of the All Indiana Podcast Network and allindianapodcastnetwork.com.
Thank you for joining us for All Indiana Politics. We'll be back here next Sunday morning at 9:30. You can also find our brand new All Indiana Politics podcast as part of the All Indiana Podcast Network at wishtv.com. Have a great rest of your weekend.
From Wish TV, this is All Indiana Politics Podcast on the All Indiana Podcast Network. Watch All Indiana Politics live Sunday mornings at 9:30 on Wish TV and at wishtv.com. Subscribe to this podcast and listen weekly here on the All Indiana Podcast Network. And be sure to discover even more great podcasts at allindianapodcastnetwork.com.